Hello, I'm Phil Jacobus. It's August 10th at 11 a.m. and I'm here at my home in Woodstock, New York. It's a lovely day. Thanks very much for joining me. Today, I'm joined by a very interesting fellow, Mr. Scott Galbari, who is the CTO at Lyniate, and you'll enjoy this chat. But before we visit with Scott, let's take a peek at a few of the latest news stories on Healthcare Business News Online specifically. And as always, I encourage you to sign up for our online news. You won't be sorry you did. So here's a story about a partnership between General Electric and Ford to build ventilators, and how it's been beneficial to Ford, but it's a challenge to GE. But I would like to point out that GE beat their expectations according to Squawk Box, and that's good news. Here we see that Siemens has received FDA clearance for a mobile head CT scanner. Interesting story and worth the read. There's also a story from our August Healthcare Business News magazine issue about CT tubes, and that's an interesting read. So I encourage you to read that. And once again, let me remind you that you should sign up for our free online news. You'll be glad that you did. So now I'd like to, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest, Scott Galbari. Is it Galbari? Am I pronouncing it correctly?
You're okay, Galbari, but I'm okay with Galbari.
I'm sorry, I want to do it right. With Lyniate, which is an interesting company that I've learned about recently. So Scott, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Phil. It's a pleasure to meet you.
So just for those not familiar with Lyniate and how it came to be, could you give us from 5,000 feet in the air how the company is made up?
Yeah, sure. Lyniate actually combined the top two rated interface engines by class in the marketplace together into one organization. And our products are interoperability platforms that enable different systems to interact with each other and to share data between them.
I see. So, and that carries over both CMS and ONC rules, and there have been a lot of changes in CMS and ONC rules with respect to interoperability. Can you just mention or talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure, Phil. There's a lot of really exciting things going on in interoperability right now. Interoperability has always been a bit of a challenge within healthcare, and it's been an area that hasn't been invested or focused on over time. But recently, the ONC and CMS came out with some final rulings earlier this year that put requirements onto payers, providers, as well as healthcare IT application vendors. And those requirements actually put a lot of responsibility on each of these different actors to fulfill a basic set of interoperability needs that'll help to empower patients with getting access to their information, to moving it around, and to ideally help with their care workflows. And to give you an idea of some of those requirements, on the payer side, payers now need to implement the ability for a patient access API, which means that a patient can go and get all of the information via an API about the claims for all the procedures they've had done or all the healthcare that they've had done that has gone through the payer. Likewise, payers have to implement a provider directory so that individuals can now, via an application programming interface, discover who are the providers within a particular payer's network. And these things are really advantageous because before, if you want to get this information, you'd have to go and try to get on the phone, talk to someone. You'd have to get the information maybe emailed, if you're lucky, sent via mail or fax. And it'd be really hard to track that down. So having interfaces in place will now allow other individuals to create applications that can then consume those interfaces and get that information for the end user and the consumer. When you look at the providers and healthcare IT vendors who are creating applications, the ONC rulings added quite a bit around of requirements around utilization of FHIR, which is a newer version of the traditional HL7 standard. And it is really geared towards API style integrations. And they mandated the necessity to have the ability to export information from systems. So once again, if you're a consumer of healthcare, being able to get your information from an EHR, an EMR, and take it to another location is a challenging mission today, if you've ever gone through the healthcare journey. And so these requirements allow or stipulate that you now need to be able to have APIs in which people can write applications that can go and find the data and extract it and take it to another location. One other key requirement that I'll just highlight that's really important is there's an information blocking rule in the ONC final rule. And that really is around stipulating now that vendors and providers cannot go and block access to information within their systems. And that's seen as a huge deal because historically there was a lot of capital developed in the data repositories, perhaps that providers had or EMRs had. And now you're basically having requirements that say that you can't block access. You have to give free open access to this information so that it can be used throughout the healthcare ecosystem.
Well, as a senior who will probably be looking at healthcare in the future, I'm really glad that there's going to be less pressing one for this and two for that. And it's great news that they're applying the same sort of technology to healthcare that we have in everyday life. So maybe for once the government has got it right. COVID-19, the pandemic has probably, as I understand it, has delayed the implementation of some of these rules. If we had these rules implemented last year, would we have saved time in the way we've dealt with COVID-19 in this year?
Yeah, great question. I think the pandemic has really exacerbated the problem. I mean, as consumers of healthcare, when we go and try to navigate the healthcare system and try to work with multiple providers and get the information and take your images perhaps to another facility or go and work with a specialist and get your clinical record, we know that that's a challenge. But in the case of a pandemic, the access to information is really critical in order to make decisions about how a disease is progressing in different regions and throughout the country. And so what's happening now with regards to the pandemic is there are mandatory reporting requirements around infectious diseases that go from hospitals and health systems and get reported to state agencies and then to federal agencies. However, there are a lot of challenges with those mechanisms today. So without these new rules that have been put in place, there's been challenges with the data quality being sent in. So you could imagine that without having as much consistency in data being provided from all of the different applications used at all of these different providers, you now have different formats coming in to the state agencies or the federal agencies, and they're trying to figure out, well, how do I interpret this information? They then also are trying to figure out, well, there's a lot of times missing information. Key things like, imagine if you don't have the zip code or the location of the patient in there, it defeats a lot of the purpose of trying to collate this information and trying to make intelligent decisions about the progression of disease. So you can see there's this aspect of having good quality data coming in to allow you to have more informed decisions. On top of that, because of the large volume of information that's coming across now, it traditionally has been sent as batches. So you have batched information sent at certain periods of time from hospitals or health systems to these agencies. And what's happening now is because there's such a high amount of data being sent more rapidly than has been done before, a lot of the implementations that were put in place have not been able to necessarily deal with some of the volume, because you didn't anticipate when you stood up the system how you're going to deal with the volume being blasted in one big shot at a particular time. So we're seeing a lot of organizations come to us and ask us to help them with that problem, helping with data cleanup, helping with scalability and performance to deal with the large volume of data. One other thing I probably highlight, Phil, on this, that when you look at the pandemic, there's been a lot of alternative treatment, or I should say, alternative means by getting access to care. And so the most common one that people are aware of is telehealth. And so telehealth has gotten a huge uplift right now during the pandemic, as people, could get a lot of things done, just like we are talking over a webcam here. You could talk to a provider and get a lot of answers to your questions without actually having to go in to see someone. And that's advantageous, because you then don't have to have the people in person and having the potential to continue to spread the disease. So telehealth really has taken off during this, and quite honestly, it's been helpful that a lot of regulations have empowered the ability to bill and to recognize the benefits that people are getting through telehealth. What we can imagine happens is that these telehealth platforms are once again another application. They're another application out there that can become a data silo. And if you imagine interacting through telehealth, how does that telehealth application and the provider who's going to join you on that call, how do they actually know about your history and your record and all your background information? And when you get done with that call and that interaction, how does all of the information from that visit get joined together with the rest of your record? And there again lies another key problem with interoperability, when you have disparate systems and no common mechanism for communicating this information. And these ONC and CMS rulings really help to push the standards forward. It takes HL7 to the next level with trying to leverage a very common way of representing data. The US core data for interoperability is the key format and template for information that needs to be passed between different systems, like patient history, clinical notes, allergies, those kinds of things. And having a standard way of doing that via common web-based API protocols should certainly help us bridge the gap between these disparate systems.
Well, not only is it an interesting topic, but you are clearly a very knowledgeable guy. And I appreciate you joining me today. And I imagine that people will learn from this interview. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the time today, Phil. It was a pleasure talking with you.